everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Wisdom Words podcast, where every week we're in conversation with people who have stories, advice, and life hacks, all of which take you one step closer to that feeling of hope. I'm your host, Neil Trivedi, and today I am so proud to be joined by journalist, author of several books, which we'll definitely get into, and a cult specialist. She has dedicated much of her recent years in studying the cults, has this fantastic book out called Cult Trip, which is still coming in the US in a short while, but it's fantastic. I've been reading it. We have Anke Richter. Hi, welcome to the show.
Oh, hi, Neil. Great to be here. Thank you for having me and for the great intro. Yeah, the book is out in April internationally.
Yeah, so let's get into, before we get into that, can you tell people, where are you exactly? Let our audience know where you are. I know where, but for those who may not.
I'm in Christchurch, New Zealand, on the South Island of New Zealand, other side of the world from you. And it's still late summer here. Yes, it's a beautiful place to live. I immigrated here 20 years ago with my family from Germany.
From Germany, right? Yeah, that's awesome. So I thought let's start by defining we know what it is, but how would you, as somebody as an expert of this, how would you define the word cult? What makes it a cult?
What makes a cult a cult? I know it's such an overused word for things that just have a hype or that we think are weird. What makes a cult a cult? A better word for it that the academics also use is high control group or high demand group, which kind of says it all. There's a high level of control. So people are usually bound together by a common cause, a common belief system, one that they can often get very fanatical about and very entrenched, one that often promises them life-changing transformation. There's usually a charismatic, often narcissistic leader at the top, usually male, but not always. There's a high degree of volunteer work, of donating time or money to the cause, to the group, and also to stay involved with the group and get the love from the group. You climb the ranks often by just donating more money or buying more courses. So money and what you put in and your hours always play a big role. Then, of course, groupthink. You're not able to actually question the doctrine or the leaders or the whole construct, the whole organization. And it's good to think outside of the box of religion here too, because a lot of cults are not even religious. MLMs, multi-level marketing schemes, have the traits of cults. We know about a pole dancing cult. We know of Buddhist cults, political cults. They can come in all shapes and forms. So it's not just about having someone in a weird robe speaking in tongues and building some golden temple. I mean, some of these things can be pretty strong indicators that you might be on the kind of trajectory, sitting at this guru's feet, and a bit of python and mumbo jumbo that you don't understand, but you can't question. I think the main thing really is, for me personally, is this whole thing of: are you able to criticize? Are you able to speak your mind, or do you censor yourself and go, "Oh no, I'm probably not smart enough. I'm not evolved enough yet. I better not say this because I just need to get with the program. And if I have questions or if something doesn't feel right, that's probably my problem, not the teacher who doesn't explain it properly or who has made some advances at students or so. If you don't question the system or the teacher or the teachings anymore, but you question yourself because something doesn't feel right, that's definitely a red flag, and you might be in a cult.
Yeah. I know that your journey, and we'll talk about the kind of people who join and your experience of why, a common reason why someone might join, and some cult leaders. I know you've seen lots of them, Bert, and you've been to Osho's in Pune and all that. So we'll get into that. But before that, tell us briefly about how this interest began. I know it's obviously Byron Bay was a huge springboard into it, but how did this interest in cults begin for you?
Yeah, like you said, Byron Bay is a bit of a hothouse for New Age spirituality and the neo-tantra world. And I went to a conscious sexuality festival there about 10 years ago now. And it was my accidental entry into cult journalism. And also I became, I would say, an accidental sex cult tourist from that. And I met a woman there called Angie, who had spent her teenage years in a former sex cult here in New Zealand called Centrepoint, which doesn't exist anymore. It was eventually shut down by activists, former survivors of the group, which is quite unusual to even get to that point. And the leader, the charismatic leader, self-appointed therapist Bert Potter, had gone to jail for sexual child abuse and drug manufacturing. So had many others from the group. So I stumbled upon this woman. I was interested in her story. I thought, hey, let's write your story down. And then it became a much, much bigger project. I'd bitten off more than I could chew. And I guess that it coincided with me going to this festival at the time, then becoming interested in conscious sexuality work and the neo-tantra scene. And I did some trainings with Esther. And I guess it's not a coincidence that I was really fascinated by a former group of people who maybe had the same interest to some degree, who were also interested in maybe polyamory or living in a community or doing therapy to get over their childhood hang-ups and their restrictive sex negative conditioning, all these things. I totally got that. And then I thought, yeah, but what went wrong? How did this utopian dream into something where in the end you have a dozen convicted pedophiles who were probably at some point with best intentions, when they went into this social experiment. So I think these two things came together. I met someone, long story, short story, from the cult, and I was also interested in this whole topic myself because I was dabbling in it. And then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then with Centrepoint in the end, like I said, I bit off more than I could chew. And on my first round of 2-3 years research, I actually gave up at some point. I had vicarious trauma coming too close to some of the victims, but we can talk about that later.
In your observation, what are some of the more common reasons why someone would join? Is it that community feeling? Is it a lot of times you hear stories, I was trying to find myself, I didn't have a purpose, and then I found this? What are some of the common reasons that you observed over this journey?
I hope it's okay if I correct you in your question, because to even think that people willingly join a cult is a misconception. People don't join cults; they join something that looks really good to them. Right? Cults have a negative connotation. People join something that is often misrepresented to them as healing, as enhancing. And it's a really great question here, because I think it's so important that we undo this myth of what a typical cult follower is. I had that too. I had that misconception. I had that people who end up with, say, Hare Krishnas or so, that they're the lost kids on the streets of London or Dallas, Texas, or wherever, and they get a free meal and they don't have a home and they're lost and maybe weak and stupid. That's what I used to think. And it's absolutely not the case. It's almost more the opposite. I mean, you've probably watched The Vow. Look at the kind of people who were Nexium. They were successful film stars. They were kids of heads of governments, trust fund kids, people with educations, with ambitions, with great looks, it's not like they're necessarily needed to finally find some friends. So it's something else. There is definitely a need for community, which maybe our nuclear family life or our normal society, and especially I guess with pandemic and lockdowns and more isolation, which it doesn't provide. And I guess also for people who've left religion or who never really had the comfort maybe of a church upbringing or so, with all its good and bad sides, there is a really deep human need to be part of a quote unquote tribe. I don't want to, this word gets so, it's often culture inappropriate to use it in that context. I have a bit of a reaction to the word, but it does come from that, I guess, really archaic feeling of wanting to be part of a good thing that nourishes you, not just doesn't just give you financial stability, but also like social stability and spiritual input and so on. So people who end up in cults, they don't join the cult, but they end up in something that then is a cult, which they didn't see coming at the time. They are emotionally open. They have open minds. They have open hearts. They often want to do good in the world. They are not just interested in materialistic things. They often have a good social network, because that means they can bring other people in. So they're actually often the best kind of people in society, I think. And a lot of great people are in cults. Some of the best people I've met along the way have been in cults. And so that's really important, because to drum that in, because it doesn't help if we think it's the weak and the stupid, because then we can never accept that we might be in a cult. So in order to get it, you might be, stuck in something. You've got to accept the fact, I'm susceptible, you're susceptible, like everyone else is. We have an Achilles heel where something can land at the right time. And as I've heard a cult expert once say, there's usually a temporary situational vulnerability. It could be, a relationship breakdown. It could be a health crisis, cancer, whatever, something big that you've gone through in your life. And suddenly you're questioning the status quo of how you've been doing things. And then something clicks and you go to this thing where someone says a few words or offers a program, or you get a sense of, wow, these are my people. They're speaking to what I need right now. I should be doing more of that. I should be booking that coaching program. And then you're on the on the conveyor belt, on the conveyor belt.
Yeah. Is that why we always hear, like, and because over the years, seen the introduction videos, there have been people, even not just if we take the sex cults or religious, you mentioned in the beginning, right? It could be anything. It could even be those pyramid scheme people which try to haul you in. But the videos or introductions, like you said, are always stuff like, you are loved, you never felt loved, or you never found purpose, we give that to you, right? Is that why those introductions are always so loving and so catching? And is it to draw those people in who think they're joining, like you said, some kind of organization, but not a cult, but when it really, as they go, maybe they'll discover much later that something doesn't seem right here, right?
And the way you just described that intro, I've seen a lot of those. And for me now, of course, it works like a repellent. It's almost like, oh my God, if they promise you that.
Watch out, right? Watch out.
Watch out. Anyone who makes grandiose claims that they have all the truth, even the word evolutionary. I have some lovely friends here in New Zealand who offer workshops and combined with, say, ecstatic dance or whatnot, and then the word evolutionary pops up, and then I'm going like, oh no, if you really claim that you're changing the evolution of the world by putting people through your weekend workshop, that's a bit far-fetched. So these big claims, and also this thing about that they have all the answers, which might not always be so apparent at first. Let's say you enroll with a yoga school like Agama Yoga on Thailand, which I researched extensively, and they are an offspring, or their guru is an offspring of a very litigious sex cult called Misa, which has the Ackman Foundation as their umbrella, with lots of yoga outlets around the world, like Tara Yoga in the UK and Nata Yoga in Scandinavia. So I just want to put this out here. People don't know. They go to a yoga class and they get fed spoonfuls of a bit more and your sexual empowerment, and maybe you want to become a total divine goddess, and maybe you should start drinking your urine, and maybe you should do some pole dancing, or whatever it is. They, some quackery comes in there, some dubious health advice, and further down, and sooner or later, the more you think you're getting the benefits from this, or maybe you just have to try harder and do more of their programs, and then you're getting the benefit of it, the more you will just accept everything they tell you, and that could be across the board about your sexuality, about your your cancer diagnosis, that you shouldn't get any treatment, but you should just do more yoga postures. People have actually died on some yoga gurus' watch, because they just take it for the truth. Just because someone's good at yoga, or someone's maybe good at business coaching, or someone's good at selling essential oils in a pyramid scheme, doesn't mean they have all the answers for your life. And this is where I think it gets really, really tricky, because let's face it, most cults or most culty groups have something good to offer. Otherwise, no one would be there in the first place. So we're coming back to this myth of the stupid cult follower, which is actually not true, right? There's always something, even Scientology, I guess. If you do some of the entry level courses, you probably learn some good communication skills, right? And if you go to yoga classes or you do a coaching program, I'm sure there's always something in the beginning that works for you. And let's not forget that either. There is always some good content, but then it gets tricky further down the track. The more is asked of you, the higher the demand. This is why it's called a high demand group. The more of a demand there is on you, what you have to give, what you have to understand, how you have to participate, how you have to be, how you have to conform. That's the culty stuff.
Yeah. And is it in this is based on much of your observations because you have done extensive research on this so much. Like, what kind of evolution did you see in people who, if they start to realize, wait a minute, something doesn't feel right, what holds them back from still? Is it just denial that no, this is still not a cult because it's still helping me? Or is it they still see more good than bad? Or is it more, are they afraid? What are some of the reasons why maybe maybe somebody is on that verge of finding out this is a cult, but still can't get themselves to leave, or can't seem to take that step of saying, no, I'm gonna walk away from this, or offer backlash, or et cetera, et cetera?
I think you actually hit on all the right points here. So it is probably a combination of those, or it can be one of those in a strong way. Let's say I'm just thinking back now, I'm thinking of Centerpoint, where families who joined, they gave all their belongings in there. They gave everything. And then let's say 5-10 years down the track, you realize that something here is not right, and your children are not safe, and you've been conforming to some dogma around promiscuity that actually doesn't sit right with you, and your relationship is on the rocks, and you are deeply unhappy, and all they offer you is do more therapy and do more whatever, weird sexual healing stuff with a guru. So you can't just leave. This is your kid's home. This is where all your friends are. This is your social network. This has become your world. Plus, you have no funds. You have nothing when you leave. So that's a very obvious situation when you're in a residential community and you've donated, all your belongings to them. But it's not always like that. People can be trapped in the same way, like in a spiritual prison, because this was their belief system. This was their religion. This is what they gave everything to. This needs to work for them. This needs to be right. This can't be wrong. Because if they realize it is, what have they got left? How can they even in the mirror and face the shambles of their life, or face their children and their family, maybe the family on the outside, or friends who always said, hey, no, this is not good for you. You're in some weird cult there. What's this that you're subscribing to? So the denial can keep, denial and cognitive dissonance and spiritual bypassing, which is telling yourself, this is all happening for a reason. The reason I'm suffering is probably good for me. This is the big learning. This is the healing crisis I'm going to. This is why I'm feeling so awful, right? Yeah. There's going to be light at the tunnel. So all of these things can lead to enormous amounts of denial and just sort of pushing forward. But I spoke to cult expert Danielle Lalich, who I really rate. Spoke to her not too long ago, and she gave me this analogy of the shelf on the back of your head. So usually with cult members or people in cults, they park these doubts on the shelf in the back of the head. Something doesn't feel right, something's off. They caught the guru lying. They've seen, some things just don't add up anymore. There are more and more doubts, but they park them so that they can just keep going and feel like everything's normal and everything's fine. But at some point, the shelf breaks, and that's the moment. So it can be a combination of all of what you said.
So let's get in onto the flip side, cult leaders. Let's talk about some of the cult leaders you've come across, as well as those that you've researched or are aware of, TVs, documentaries, that some of who we all have seen, some which you've experienced firsthand. What are some of the most common traits you have seen of cult leaders that sort of pull these people in?
Well, I've definitely met one outright cult leader. That's Howard Temple, who's at the helm of Gloriaville. And Gloriaville is this fundamentalist Christian enclave, gulag. Let's call it a gulag because there's slave labor here. In the bush on the west coast in New Zealand, very remote, and it's quite unique because the costumes of the Handmaid's Tale were actually modeled on how Gloriaville women dress.
Oh, really?
And I think the parallels between Gilead, the the fictional, Christian dictatorship of the Handmaid's Tale, it has a lot of parallels to what women in Gloriavale go through, because they are breeding
Okay.
and they're so subjugated, and there's all this pressure on them to have as many children as possible, and so on. Anyway, there was just an intro to say I met the current leader of that cult, because I just went in there and had a conversation with him. I've met quite a few other people over the years who I probably at the time didn't see as cult leaders. I saw them more as even one as my teacher, as people who were charismatic and fascinating, and I was sitting at their, well, maybe not their feet, but I was doing every one of their workshops. Couldn't get enough of what they had to say. Yeah, I was one of those people. So I've met quite a few people who I now see through a different lens, where I see,
of course,
I see their manipulation. I've heard their sob stories a few times. I've seen how sexually transgressive they are or can be. I've heard and seen enough or to understand how someone who I've actually liked at some point and maybe even assisted as a workshop assistant on their training can now be seen as a cult leader through another lens, or putting a few other dots together. That people are not just born as monsters, but there is an ideology and an environment and a leadership and all these dynamics that come together. But what was shocking for me, I thought, okay, I don't want to excuse any of those awful deeds.
Right.
And I also understand that people can become a product of their environment and do things they maybe wouldn't have done otherwise. What I don't understand is, years later, and at least with Centerpoint, decades later, that people who have had all the opportunity to learn since then, to understand what they were really involved in, who've heard the voices of survivors, of their victims, who've been confronted with them, through journalists, through court cases, through academia, they've had a long time to get their head around what they have done and what role, how they've destroyed other people's lives. What I do not understand is that they are not able at this stage to see that and to make amends and to make repairs and to give an apology. That's for me still a really big piece, and I hope my book highlights how awful that is, and how traumatizing that still is for these survivors, even years and decades later when they're adults, what they struggle with, how damaged they are. I did not expect that, and I did not expect the level of denial from the perpetrators.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I think they say that the number one rule of them is they'll never admit to being a cult leader. Other things, yes. Organization, no. We are not a cult, right? That's the number one denial of all cult leaders or don't call us a cult.
Don't call us a cult. But also, we always focus on the leaders, and yes, the leaders are the ones in charge, right? So they hold the power. And they're also the enablers and the apologists and the bystanders. These are three different roles, but they're all part of the system. If you look at Harvey Weinstein, if you look at Nazi Germany, I come from Germany, so this is really important in terms of understanding. There isn't just one lead figure, be it Harvey Weinstein or be it Adolf Hitler. They are people upholding the system, profiting from the system, enabling the system, or maybe they're just doing what they can to survive in the system, but that also means it's pretty bad what they're doing. Yeah. So there are levels of involvement and levels of guilt. But this all needs to be unpacked, and I don't think it's helpful. If you look at some of the previous cult reporting in not so much the last couple of years. I think things have gotten a lot better, but early on, where it was all about the weird and wacky gurus, and then the misled people following them. But we're not talking about the middle management. The smart and influential people who are in the second tier, and they're often women actually. If you look at some of these groups. Very often women at Centerpoint and also in Osho's and lots of other groups.
NXIVM too, right?
NXIVM, exactly. So that's the thing. And NXIVM is another great example. Thank you. It's not just about Keith Raniere. It's also, when does the victim become the perpetrator. Look at someone like Nancy Saltzman or so, where the verdict's out. Is she still manipulating people to now think that she's just a victim? How much was she a perpetrator? How much was she like a spiritual pimp for the guru, and all of that?
Yeah.
These are really nuanced discussions that we need to have to really understand these roles and get back from just the black and white, and also hold people accountable, and not just the cult leaders, but also help them to rehabilitate. And so for that, we need people who do good exit counseling, who understand why people have done bad things in cults, not only for the victims and survivors, they need it the most, but also for people who've done bad stuff. Because if that weighs on your conscience and you don't have a way to work through this and do some kind of transformative justice, that's also needed.
Yeah. I mean, what was, I remember, like, just as an example, if we take NXIVM and Keith Raniere, obviously, there were articles that were in favor of Alison Mack, who was obviously, like you said, a perpetrator or enabler or whatever, definitely had a hand. But they were half the media saying, should we be sympathetic? Maybe she was brainwashed by Keith to do this. So is that possible? Can enablers also be brainwashed into siding, or do they still need to be some accountability for it? Because you could argue, well, no, how could you be brainwashed to that extent where you have a cult of women and you brand them with that iron? I'm talking about the NXIVM thing. I mean, it just seems so bizarre that, okay, even if it's a brainwashing for an enabler, how far could it actually have been? That's the question I would wonder.
I mean, I'm not a lawyer or a prosecutor, but I'm sure this is something that will come up in the court cases with NXIVM, of course, and it's come up in, if you look at another abusive system, just to also give the bigger picture stuff, whether it's Nazi Germany or trials of war crimes and so on. It's a valid question. How much was someone, let's say, brainwashed or ideologized? How much were people doing this out of their own accord? And I'm not the court psychiatrist here. I can't look into this.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah.
Just from my understanding, from my own journalistic research, I think it's both. It's both. I'm probably a soft-hearted, very empathic, compassionate journalist. So I tend to err on the side of caution often, where I think, well, people didn't know better, or but then if you ask some of the survivors, they would go, yeah, actually, did they not? Don't they have some inner moral compass that they knew this is wrong, that you do not touch children's genitals when you do not have sex, you don't invite them into the parental or the couple's bed to watch you and then start something if they isn't there. But then again, let's also look at this with a sex like sentiment. Look at this also through the lens of the 70s and 80s and what was so avant-garde psychology at the time. And there were some professors and academics out there who thought this is the liberation, the sexual liberation for children as well, and it needs to happen, because what they had before was the very repressive Christian, moralistic, sex-shaming upbringing. So they thought the next frontier is actually get rid of that by treating children as if they're sexual. I mean, they are sexual beings in their own right, but not for adults' gratification. Obviously, I mean, I think that's a common consensus these days. But in some parts of society, and they weren't all pedophiles, it certainly opened the door to pedophilia or to some pedophilic tendencies that they were then sanctioned or normalized. But it was, I know from Centerpoint, there were parents who had to override their shock and horror and disgust and whatnot to do certain things which they thought were beneficial for their own children, right? This is how far this can go. So, were they brainwashed? I would say yes. Did they still do an awful thing? Yes. Do they need to be held accountable for that? Yes. And can we have compassion for them? Yes. So I think all of that is possible.
Yeah, I think that's the best explanation I've heard, like from anybody, is probably is a mixture, and maybe it's a conflict of brainwashing versus knowing the truth. But it's possible that the brainwashing is probably just overpowering knowing the truth. Like it maybe that's allowing it to suppress it to where even if at the back of your mind you're like, okay, this is wrong. No, no, suppress it, and maybe the brainwashing just ends up to be more powerful than the reality of it. Right? That could be. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist either. I too,
Yeah,
like you, for many years was a journalist actually. So I so get that. I majored in journalism as well. So I was a journalist for many years before I became a podcaster. So
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, like you said, we're both not psychologists. I'm definitely not an
yeah,
expert on brainwashing. Even the term is debatable, but then I think it's been more cult experts who said there is no brainwashing. Other cult experts say yes, there is. So, verdict. I'm. That's not really my battle. But I'm interested in this whole thing around guilt and shame because, and some of these conscious sexuality courses and trainings that I took over the years, the tagline was always, get rid of your fear, shame, and guilt. And it's such a great concept, right? I mean, who needs fear, shame, and guilt? It's crippling us. It makes us feel awful. It comes out sideways if we can't own our desires or be who we truly are as our sexual selves and our identity. Totally, right? I was so on board with all of that. And I've had a bit of a rethink also about this thing around shame and guilt and even fear. I mean, fear can be it's an innate mechanism that we have to understand where the danger is. So, if we're crippled by fear, maybe not such a good thing, but to have some fear of certain things can be a very healthy mechanism. The same with guilt and shame. With some of the perpetrators in this field, and I'm not just talking from 20, 30 years ago at Centerburn, but also some of the recent ones that we know of in the conscious sexuality field. I wish they would have a bit more shame and guilt, actually. Maybe some of that would be a really healthy thing. Shame is there to help you understand what you've done, and then maybe you can move forward and can make amends and can redeem yourself. If you have no shame, why would you redeem yourself? Why would you even listen to your victim? I'm seeing so much. I'm on a bit of a rant now, Neil, but I'm seeing so much victim shaming and spiritual bypassing in the neo-tantra and the conscious sexuality scene, and I wish there was more of a sense of we also make mistakes. We should be ashamed about hurting people, not respecting their boundaries and using them. The shame and guilt-free person is not my ideal anymore. But for a while I believed in that. So again, I think it's new. So let's get rid of the shame, fear, and guilt that that cripples us and stifles who we are and doesn't give us the sex life we deserve or the identity we have. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Some shame and guilt is definitely needed for people to understand what they've actually done.
Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, wouldn't you be a narcissist if you didn't have any shame? Wouldn't that more qualify as a narcissist? Then that's not a good thing. So.
Again, here we are, the Luddites who are not psychologists and psychiatrists, identifying what makes a narcissist. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my layman's understanding, not having the sense of guilt is one of those indicators for a malignant narcissist, right? So here we go.
Yeah. I'm not a psychologist. I've talked to psychologists on this podcast, and they would agree. So yeah. We got that one for us, definitely. Okay, so we'll get into some of the difficulties that you had in writing the book and getting to. But before that, I wanted to know. This might be like very open-ended, or this might like require a little bit of thinking. But what was the most disturbing activity you ever saw while doing your research for your book and all those years you spent observing people? What's the most disturbing thing, if you don't mind sharing?
It was hearing Louise's story. The woman from Centerpoint who went there when she was 11 years old, and I mean, I don't even want to say some of these awful things here. People can read it in the book and then put it down again. And it's pretty full on. That really rocked me and disturbed me. And I think almost equally disturbing then was, facing the person, meeting the person who violated her, one of them, but definitely one who, who had a massive impact.
Yeah.
Getting anything from him and feeling he couldn't even remember. He could not even remember anything that happened to her. That's how low it ranked for him. And for her, it's destroyed her life, right? So this, just coming so close to people's psyche and understanding what goes on there for them, that was pretty horrific. I mean, in terms of my own experiences, okay. I mean, I've been through some groups. I was pretty put off and disturbed by some of the things I saw in the new Tantra or TNT. It's a Dutch outfit. They've had some pretty bad press, and rightly so, I think, over the last years for some of the sexual abuse that took place and emotional, psychological abuse that took place. But I think it was more in the inner circle, if I remember that right. If you were deeper in the organization, this is when all this stuff happened. It wasn't so much on the courses, but the stuff that I've experienced while they're on the course, I found some of that absolutely borderline. How they were encouraging people to smoke weed and have, drink alcohol and all of that in the evening, before they were going into some more, pretty edgy exercises with clothes off and sexual, touching and whatnot, basically wanting people to lose the inhibition, to override their boundaries. It was all about pushy boundaries. I mean, there's some pretty gross stuff there. I mean, each to their own, but maybe for me it was just gross, or some things that I thought, but they really want you to be transgressive. They really want you to act out some situations that are, also around pedophilia and incest. I would say more incest, like someone stands in for your parent, and then you're encouraged over the microphone to have sex with them. I remember this in my ear, someone yelling, "You have 5 minutes to fuck your daddy," and people, I mean, this is real stuff that I witnessed. I thought, wow, people are so acceptable in these spaces. There's the music pumping. They're on this course. They've given a lot of money. They want to have some outcome. They see some of these people all shiny and amazing and sexy, and they get with the program, and everyone wants to be the same, right? I've really seen it there firsthand, the kind of pressure, and amidst some good content. This is the thing. There's always some good stuff. People say, "Oh yeah, no, this is amazing. This actually it's just like good sex education for adults. Everyone should be doing this." But then there's other stuff in there where people are so conditioned to override their boundaries and get with a program, not question and not leave the room. And then they're getting those who do leave the room because they're just tired and exhausted, or they're just grossed out, or they do not feel like fucking their daddy, in a group room, in front of others or stuff like that. They are being shamed and ridiculed and mocked by the group leader. I've seen it all. I've been there, and people got ranked at the end. Whether you make the cut or not for the next course, that's in front of everyone. This really reminded me of Centrepoint, the former New Zealand sex card, where they had what they called the hierarchy, like a public ranking where people were put in line, moved up and down by other members. It was almost like watching, being in this life experience of something that I'd only historically researched about former sex casts. And I thought, wow, here we are. This is how this looks in 2020 or 2015 or whatever. Yeah.
Does that surprise you that even though we have the information, we have media, the exposure of the media rather is as powerful as it ever has been, right? Because of the internet, social media, everything. And yet there's still cults out there, and there's still dangerous experiences like you just described. It's still going on, and people are still in it. And the horror of all this, the horrific things are still being done. I mean, does that surprise you in this day and age when we have so many exposés and the WOW and the documentaries and Netflix? It's so much, and yet it's still there.
It's still there. And if you can't hear me sigh on the audio, you can see
And
me.
your book is there. And your book is there.
Yeah, you can see me rolling my eyes. This is right up my alley. Thank you for saying that, because yes, I feel the same. How can it be possible? But then I come across people and they've Googled something and they still go to a certain training and they still go to a certain mystery school, and they are not fazed by, people telling them, actually, there's a number of accusations. Maybe these people should clean up your act first before you go and bring your money there or commit to a 6-week course that could very much suck you into their whole community. And then you might not be the critical thinker anymore who you think you are now. No,
Yeah.
People want to get, what it's called, I got mine. People want to get their slice of the pie. And you know what? I get it. I was the same. I was an intensity junkie. I wanted to get my fix. I wanted to keep playing with the cool kids. I wanted to get my quote unquote transformation, whatever that was at the time. And I thought, wow, these, look, I'm in the process at the moment of getting diagnosed with ADHD, and even that. I look through it through this lens now. I think, wow, intensity junkie, huh, Anke? Right. No wonder you were drawn to this school like ISTA, which is quite extreme in some ways, and where things are so cathartic, so intense, and you're on this constant high, and all this shedding skins and screaming stuff out. That totally worked for me, because of how my brain chemistry is. And
I would imagine that your book, that's the kind of trouble you face. What kind of trouble? Was it people not wanting to talk, trying to get them to talk? What are some of the hurdles that you faced in getting there, getting to where it is now, published and ready to be showcased to the world?
How did I find people? Wow, how difficult was that? Well, my book is also the making of my book, right? And the struggle of doing that and finding these people. I mean, in the beginning it was great. It was like, wow, here's like this carte blanche, and I can just go and see who I find, and they would tell me their stories, and the puzzle would come together. Well, the puzzle became this labyrinth or this spider web, and it was murky and gray, and there was no black and white anymore. It was just like one big gray web. And I did find a lot of people, but I also found a lot of people who did not want to talk and who panicked. And one guy especially, who was a whistleblower at Centerpoint, came across his story and thought, wow, this guy, I'm sure he'd be happy to talk, because I found his unpublished memoir on these little mini discs from the 1990s, and I had them they somehow fell into my hands with some material that was given to me, and I had them transcribed. And I found, that was that's the fun, like the for me often it's not good to say it's fun, no, but why not? My job can also be great. The good part of it was sometimes very rewarding finding people.
The perks of journalism,
the investigative part of how to actually find someone who doesn't have any, hasn't left any trace on the internet or anything. And I did find people. And in this case with this guy, he completely panicked because I had triggered his PTSD from having been a whistleblower, from having been shunned, from having had a whole community turn against him and whatnot. I don't know, more about him and his personal background and what happened to his kids. And there could have been a lot of internal conflict within his family around him just having been at Centerpoint and so on. So he made basically illegal threat against me. And I had the same from another victim who was one of the main whistleblowers in the early days when the things about Centerpoint came out, and she turned against me. She did not want anyone coming near her story. So I had to learn these things the hard way, Neil. I'm not trained in trauma or how to talk to survivors of sexual abuse. I haven't had any counseling. I've seen a therapist myself, but I've never. It's not like I get supervision for my job. I'm not part of a media company or anything. I did not have mental health input for all my research, but I basically did the same that I guess someone does who is investigating for the police or so, and speaks to victims for the first time. And so I also made mistakes. I was often too fast, too pushy. Maybe that felt manipulative sometimes to some victims, and I'm glad that they let me know, and I learned from that. And And we are back on the same page, which I'm super, super grateful for. When I gave the Centerpoint book, when I had to give that up because it just became so taxing for me emotionally, and there were legal threats, and then I couldn't meet my publisher's deadline. They didn't want to extend it. They probably got cold feet at that stage, thinking, "Oh my God, what are we dealing with here?" All this mess that Anke stepped into. I basically quit the whole project, but then I wrote the making of for the biggest, one of the biggest magazines here in New Zealand for North and South, which felt very, very small comparison to the book it could have been. But when that story came out, I had gone over every word with Angie. She had read it all. She knew what was in there. She was fine with it. And when it came out, still, she had a big reaction, and the reaction was that she actually turned against me for a few weeks, where she fell back into her old cult persona, where the media was evil. They were just there to use people. I was just doing it for the money, which was laughable given years of work gone into a story that made, you get $1,000 for. And so all of these things came together. And again, it was very painful for me too, because I thought, when this story comes out, Angie is the person who would understand the most. We've been through this. And again, tricky for me, maybe not very professional of me, that I made one of my subjects, so to speak, my confidant also, that they became my allies. We were allies in this together. And so I was sort of crossing the line from journalist to activist. And I guess that can easily happen, not just because I'm an empathic person. It's also to get people to open up to you and to really trust you. You have to come close. You do become friends at some level. You don't just stay behind your professional mask and use their material and then run with it, right? There is a responsibility, and there's a trust and there's a connection. So the fact that I got these incredible personal stories from people, then the flip side of that was that it also meant I was actually too close to them. And it not just did it mess with my psyche, and I took it to heart too much. And, I became, I wouldn't say mentally unstable, but I certainly had some problems from that. But it also meant that I was maybe too identified with how they feel about my writing. Am I going to make them happy? Am I going to make them proud? Will they celebrate with me? And that wasn't the case. And one of the victims, Louise, the girl in the caravan for my book, she was super disappointed because she had hoped for this big book, and then it didn't come. And then there was only the magazine story. And Angie had a totally different reaction. She suddenly felt used, and she thought this is all sensationalist, and maybe she should have never trusted me. We're all on the same page now, and they both saw it through with me with this book for the second round. So just to give your listeners some context here. So I parked this. No, I actually gave up on the original book, and I felt like I'd given up on a PhD. It would have been my first book in English. My previous books were in German. It was a massive, massive piece of work and a massive failure. And I never thought I'd ever look at it again. And then I was approached by HarperCollins about 2 years ago, and when they were looking for someone to write a book about New Zealand cults, and I said, well, yeah, you've probably come to the right person. I actually have like a manuscript, to some degree, at least about one cult, Centerpoint, that I've never looked at since then. And so I'm just super grateful to Angie and Louise and all the other people who had it in them. I had it in me to do this, but they also had to have it in them to go through all this with me again and to read over everything. And they didn't have to tell me the whole story again, but they still had to professionally work with me on the material. And I just have so much respect for them doing that. And I'm super grateful, because without their stories, especially those two, were like the cornerstone of my book. Without their stories, or without any of these survivors, also from the other cults, who sat down with me or were on Zoom calls with me and trusted me and gave me their time and their trust, this book wouldn't have happened. So all power to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we mentioned, it's called Cult Trip. And I believe the physical copy is coming out soon in the US. The digital copy is out in April.
That's right. 6th of April, everyone can buy a paper copy worldwide, and it's already out on Kindle. That's right.
Yeah. Well, I could talk to you for another 3, 4 hours if time
Oh,
wasn't an
same.
issue, and I would love to. Maybe in the future, maybe when the book officially like comes out, maybe we can do a supplement interview if you want in April or May or somewhere down the road. But yeah, this has been, oh wow, this has been such a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for doing this. Oh yeah, and quickly, if you have if your website, social media, tell our audience where they can find you.
Yeah, my website is www.anke, that's Anke, Richter, Richter, that's my name, Anke Richter, Anke like Danke, Richter like the Richter scale, all one word, .net. And I'll put events on there. I've put interviews on there. There's podcasts will be on there. People can get a lot of, I think they can get a lot of input from there. And there are also some other great resources. I really recommend the website Red Flags in Workshops, which is fantastic, especially for people who are interested in this so-called sacred sexuality world. And yeah, there's some good initiatives out there, and I'm sure I make sure to spread the word about them, because I want to really support. While I've also done some investigation into the bad stuff, I want to support the good people in that field who are trying to make it better. This has been great. I've really enjoyed this, Neil, and I love what you're doing, and really stoked to be on your podcast today. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Have a good day.